to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is conflict and how we can use conflict as an opportunity to expand our perception, to deepen our awareness, and perhaps open new areas of conceptualization. So welcome, Rosalind. Good morning. It's great to have you here with us this morning. Welcome to everybody else who's joining us. Before we get started talking about conflict, inner and outer, let's take a couple minutes to get present. So let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light, lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together. Vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the motion, and the tickling and tingling when you stop. And allow all those sensations to bring you present, right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables us to experience life. Welcome, welcome. Good morning. So conflict. Touchy topic, maybe not, but we all experience conflict at one time or another, and maybe multiple times. So conflict, we often feel conflicted about choices we may be facing. That's internal conflict that we're talking about, where I want this, but I want that, or I think, when you're trying to weigh a choice, you're faced with the two sides. I think it's the Benjamin Franklin. I think it's the Benjamin Franklin decision maker tool, where you make two columns and you put pros and you put cons and try and balance something out. And even when we're trying to make a decision and we decide to flip a coin, you flip a coin and then you realize that the thing that came up wasn't the thing you really wanted. And so we have all different ways of resolving conflict or addressing conflict, but the thing that we're talking about today is the opportunity that conflict presents to go deeper. Good morning, Robin. Welcome. Excuse me. Great to have you here with us this morning. So we're talking about conflict and how we can contend with conflict or address conflict as an opportunity rather than as a problem, or rather than as a problem. So I believe it was Einstein who said a problem can't be solved on the level at which it was created. And that's probably a bad rendition, but it gets to the notion of when there's a conflict, what we need to do is to rise to another plane. So there are certain structures of thinking, of thought, or frameworks that allow us to gain deeper insight uh, into creative thought, into generative thought, where we're looking at how do we resolve conflict, or how do we this one particular framework is one that I actually resonate with pretty deeply, and it's got three points. It's of a triangle, sort of. So there's the activating force, and there is the restraining force. So this is what we're looking at when we have conflict, right? Essentially, we have two different points of view that appear to be irreconcilable. And then the next level is the reconciling force, right? So activating resistant, or oh my gosh, I just forgot. But and then the reconciling force. So what happens is that these forces that are in opposition, restraining force, that's what it was, activating, restraining. So activating is, I have this idea. Restraining is the yeah, but part that shows up, the objections or the things that are restraining that idea from coming into fruition. When you can find a way to hold this contradiction, when you can find a way to allow the validity of both sides without needing to invalidate either one, what happens is, if you let that conflict be there long enough, it's kind of like koans, what's the sound of one hand clapping? What it requires is for you to go beyond logic, to go beyond a binary right and wrong, black and white. Funny that I'm wearing black and white today. Yes and no kind of view of the world. It requires that you move into another dimension. And what reveals itself as you allow that activating and restraining energy to be working together, holding both of them, what happens is that it's almost like a quantum shift, where there's a new level of perception. It's kind of like in the binary, when we have the polarities, all we see is the polarity. But if we can jump up to a higher level, then we can see that the polarities are part of the same thing. It's kind of like yin and yang. If you look at yin and yang and their opposition, all we see is that conflict and the inability to find any kind of reconciliation. But then if we stand back, we can see that the yin and the yang are actually creating each other. It's a generative movement. It's actually a three-dimensional generative movement where one folds into the other and creates the other. And we can see that whole as greater than the sum of the parts. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about this reconciling force, like moving to another level of understanding that isn't the obvious choice given a binary situation. And so this way of thinking, this way of holding a situation until it becomes a whole where we can see a greater dynamic is very different from our approach, for instance, to problem solving. We can kind of think of problems as conflicts, right? If I'm thinking I have a problem, there's a conflict between the way I think things should be and the way they are, right? So the problem is a divergence from the way we think things should be. And if we run around hitting attacking problems, what happens is it becomes a game of whack-a-mole, where we resolve one problem and another problem shows up, and we just continue in this endless loop of whack-a-mole. So if we were to be looking at the elements of the problem as a dynamic of that exists within a greater whole, then we can start looking for, well, what is the greater whole? So instead of trying to deal with the symptom, we deal with the root cause, is kind of the notion. If we want to take it into medical terms, for instance, if somebody's having an issue with their heart, looking at, okay, well, the heart's going too fast, what can we do to slow it down? We might be treating that, and then there's another problem that pops up because there's a contraindication for whatever we use to treat the heart, right? However, if we stand back and look at the entire system, we might recognize that there's something happening over here that is resulting in the fast heartbeat and also other things. So the same conversation occurs. We've been talking a lot about the limbic system lately, and I've been looking into the vagus nerve more and trying to understand a bit more about our nervous system and the immune system and all of that, because I've had all these kinds of conditions that they were identified as conditions, and then there's approaches to try to treat the individual conditions. And what it turns out is that all of these conditions are symptoms. They're symptoms of a dysfunctional limbic system. They're symptoms of overexcited vagus nerve, perhaps, or that there's a central thing that's unifying all these things. So rather than trying to deal with each conflict and choose sides and be in that binary view, it's like, hold all that and allow yourself somehow to stand or to float into a higher level of perception that recognizes that polarity as part of a greater whole. So I'm hoping this is making sense. So it's really powerful technology. I don't know if technology is the right word, but it's a really, really powerful framework. This activating, and it's so funny that activating, restraining, and reconciling force. It's a really powerful way to be thinking about this stuff. And I've spoken about this with you before, but I think it's something and I think it's something that gets to be revisited until we integrate it deeply, to see, okay, we've got this problem, we've got this conflict, and there's a way that we're thinking about it that is keeping it binary, that is keeping it polarized. And what kind of inroad can we find to move beyond this polarity, to create, so in the way that we've been enculturated in our competitive world, the way that we negotiate is that both parties end up being unhappy about something, right? Because, and that's a good negotiation. Or when we go to court, it's kind of like you win, you lose. We've got this win-lose polarity dynamic about things, and the concept of everybody winning, it hasn't really been something that we guide ourselves with. And so when there's conflict, it is possible, rather than one side winning and one side losing, it is possible that we can find a resolution that wasn't obvious, that actually is empowering to everybody. What a concept that might be. So I've been watching a show on Apple TV called, I think it's called For All of Mankind, or I think it's called For All of Mankind, and it's about if the space race had continued. So it's kind of like an alternate history of the space race. And there was one scenario where there was a face-off between the Russians and the United States, where there were, it's hard to describe, but there was a vessel that was going to the moon. The Russians didn't want it to go. The Americans were there to protect it. The Russians said, if you continue, we're going to blow up this thing going to the moon. And the Americans were charged with protecting this thing. So here we are at a standoff where if the Americans shot down the Russian vessel, it would be World War III. If the Russians shot down the American vessel, it would be World War III. And so what happened was, and this is a spoiler alert, so what happened was the American shot down the American vessel. And that was an out-of-the-box decision. Here was this massive conflict that was irreconcilable, really, right? It was a lose-lose. Nobody was going to win if the obvious solution, the combative solution, the polarized polarity kind of solution of I'm gonna, either you kill me or I kill you, essentially, and then everybody gets destroyed. And the solution that worked, that was out of the box, was that the Americans destroyed the American vessel, and it was chalked up to some kind of dysfunction in the vehicle. But I think that's kind of a wonderful example, because that scenario was threatening to everyone. There was no winning. with the conventional response. It was going down a deep, dark hole that was the path to ultimate destruction. And so we are in a time where there's so much conflict. We're in a time where we are being called to find bridges that we don't even see. Kind of like in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where there's this big chasm and you can't get from here to there and life is at stake, and somebody steps out into the nothingness and this bridge appears. It's kind of like that. We're in that kind of time where there are so many conflicts, and we are being called to step into another dimension of thinking, another dimension of perception, to find ways to reconcile these things that in a polarity perspective seem completely and utterly irreconcilable. And so when we have such polarized political opinions, when we have such polarized interests of corporate culture and grassroots kinds of organizations, and there's so much conflict. There is within that conflict an opportunity, a calling that is calling us to raise our awareness, to raise our thinking, our perception, our conceptualization to another level, that can, to a generative level, rather than living defined by the problem, which is a result of the past. A problem is a symptom of the past. And rather than being bound to the past in the resolution of this artifact, we have the opportunity to expand our capacity and our capabilities. We have the opportunity to be generative rather than reactive. And this notion of reconciling, the reconciling force, brings us to that kind of awareness. And it's so interesting. I've seen the magic of this. It is kind of magic. If we think about quantum physics, what the foundation of it is that things move in an, or this is a vast oversimplification, so forgive me, but things move, electrons, for instance, move in an orbital. They move in an orbital. They're fed more energy, more energy, more energy. They're still in that orbital. And then bam, they pop up to another level. Once there's enough energy that is input into the system, it's not a gradual change. It's a quantum change. It's a leap into another, I think we can say, another dimension. And we have that capability in our thinking, in our conceptualization, in our awareness. And we have more and more and more opportunities to be exposing ourselves to that kind of transformation, to be creating the conditions that, we are in the conditions that allow for that kind of generation, right? The conditions are conflict, conflict, conflict. Well, let's look at, I mean, our old ways of resolving conflict where we say you win, you lose, or everybody loses. That's not been very effective. So we have the opportunity to elevate our approach to these things. So until we can we live with the discomfort of that conflict until we allow ourselves, we hold that conflict to allow ourselves to jump to this place that offers a creative resolution or reconciliation of the opposition so that it becomes a new entity all of its own. So that's the invitation, is to be perceiving conflict as an opportunity. And how can we utilize that? How can we create something that is unitive? How can we create something that is transcendent of that conflict, that's not bound by it, that's not limited to it? So that's the question of the day, the invitation of the day, and that's it for today. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel, as well as my Facebook page. And I invite you to please share, like, follow Enlightened World Network's YouTube channel and my YouTube channel. And the links are in the description. So I'm ever so grateful always for the opportunity to share these musings together. Good morning, Dido. So glad you were here to join us. It is such a privilege, and I deeply appreciate you. So until next time, so much love to you.